Hi, everyone. Let us know in the comments if you can hear us and see us all well, but it should be fine. So, welcome to the episode number 2 of Disruption Talks. And last time we spoke about activism and how tech helps activism. Today we will speak about education, the EdTech space, and today with us is Shan Chopra. He comes from TC Global, which is the Chopra's Global, basically. And Shan is spearheading the digital transformation of TC Global, a leading global ed and learning and investment services platform that has helped over 2.5 million students get into 700 universities across 40 countries. But Shan, I think you owe us a better introduction that you'll do yourself than I ever could. So, to you.
Sure. So I mean, we're a business that has been around for a long time. We're a really interesting business because we sort of pioneered the concept of career planning and career management in India. When we started in 1995, we were solving two fundamental problems. The first really was to help accelerate and sort of broaden the horizon of students thinking about international education. And at the time, there was no real infrastructure to do that. So the founders of the company went on a massive campaign across all schools and colleges in India to help educate people on the opening up of markets that was happening and the fact that Indians didn't have to go in the same 3, 4, 5 traditional careers of engineering and doctors that people used to decide going to. And on the other side, it was really about helping universities have a formal infrastructure, an ethical and high integrity infrastructure to be able to recruit talent out of India. So many universities that started to look at India wanted to build their brand, wanted to build marketing strategies to recruit talent, and there was a bogus market basically that was taking shape at the time. So, the Chopra's group essentially pioneered the concept of international education in India, and built a near monopoly business in that up until 2010. Obviously, consumer behavior had shifted significantly, significantly shifted post 2010, and we sort of had gotten to a size where the founders wanted to professionalize the company. That took its own sort of toll on this culture. It didn't really happen too successfully as a whole because we started to initiate those efforts around 2008-9. They sort of continued, actually 2011, not 2009, but 2011. Those continued. We had a series of professionals come in and exit, and the culture of the organization took a massive hit. At the same time, we had to figure out and rediscover our operating model for the age of the internet, and that's essentially where since 2016, myself as well as a team of people, we've really been focused on reinventing the organization, rediscovering our operating model, and ensuring that we can accelerate our business into the age of the internet to solve problems for both students and partners. So the last 4 years have been a massive transition for the organization from a core analog brick and mortar business to a platform brand. We've actually just about 2 months ago launched our platform, and we're seeing really encouraging signs of adoption right now. But we're still in early phases, but ultimately it's been really exciting to transition out of an analog company and move into a platform-centric and remote-first brand.
Absolutely. So what I'm hearing is basically, and knowing the sort of, perhaps not the struggles, but certainly difficulties when you apply to university. I know that you studied in the UK, I studied in the UK, we both went through UCAS. So essentially without TC Global as an Indian youth, I would be having to do everything on my own, visa applications, all of those non-European Union, more complex things that I had to go through, the hoops. And then also not have a community of people to rely on alumni, on people who simply know some of the course professors, all of that. So basically your focus on your end users is on the promising youth in India who wants to get to the brightest places to further their education. So we can easily bind this conversation into two contextual topics. Number one is that education, especially higher education, is supposed to ensure that you have a future. And on top of that, there comes fulfillment. You love what you study and you're going to work in that field. But the system, which we will circle back later to, is not really aligned with that goal. It's more of a money-grabbing scheme that creates luxury brands of Ivy League universities and top 10s in the UK. So I think we can agree that COVID has been having a effect on all of those problems, And also, after revealing them, it also amplified them, because right now, not many people want to go to the most expensive streaming service, Zoom University, for thousands of universities, tens of thousands of dollars for a year for that. So could you tell us what you know, what you've heard from students, what you've seen from your university partners about the first reactions to COVID, the intermediary period, and right now? Because right now we're around September, October, so the academic year is starting, right?
Yeah. So I mean, there's a fair bit to unpack there. I think the first thing I will sort of want to just talk a little bit about is the fact that, you know, we're an adjacent business to the traditional higher education sector, and we essentially are responsible for a lot of the marketing, branding, and recruitment that happens in traditional HE, not amongst the top tier segment, but essentially just below the top tier and then the mid segment as well. A lot of these brands rely on companies like ours in the traditional sort of intermediate infrastructure to recruit talent for them. And so if you think about just the internet and the impact it's had on our business, the reasons why consumers engage with us once have shifted significantly. So 10 years ago, you'd get, you know, kids coming to you and they'd be like, you know, I want to study X and Y. I want to know more about the process. You know, is this like the right thing for me to study? And so they needed us to kind of really plan far more and participate in that planning far more than we do today. Today, most kids and consumers just do their research independently, and then they see us as this sort of arbitrator of truth and validation. And so they'll come to us and be like, you know, this is my research. These are the courses. These are the universities I want to do. This is the career I want to go into. Am I on the right track? And so we saw that shift occur pretty drastically and rapidly post 2010, and that was one of the main drivers of us, you know, really accelerating into the age of the internet in the way that we have. The other problem, obviously, which you speak of, is really of the talent in the sector. I mean, typically you're not attracting a really high caliber of talent, and that's because of the market condition. This is a very commoditized market. Entry barriers are very low. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry can basically set up, you know, their shop and get contracts to be able to supply students to universities. And so that problem translates and extends even to the entire higher education sector. And I think that's the main issue, is that when we start to unpack, you know, these problems of why education is not delivering a return. I mean, that's one of the big questions, right? The great question is, we're investing more and more in ed and getting less of a return. And you compare that to tech, where things, you know, you do less with more every year, and things get cheaper and cheaper to do so. And that's where I think the disruptability index is a concept that, you know, Scott Galloway talks about a lot, which I know you follow closely as well, is that, you know, higher education is probably one of the only sectors in which we can essentially continue to increase prices without changing the underlying product. And I think there's a few reasons why. I think the first is that there's a lot of signaling happening. There's a lot of signaling in the sector, in the sense that there's no accountability, really. If academics were held accountable to producing citizens that could be highly skilled, you know, showcase an enormous amount of return quickly, and were able to get amazing jobs immediately, or even sort of you know, participate in the passion and creator economy that we built, things would change drastically. Because they're not held to that account, you know, typically have lack of accountability. But but even more, I think this is in the backdrop of the fact that we've seen information become commoditized over the last 20 years. And as information's become commoditized, you're seeing more and more self-service occur, more and more self-learning occur. And so the value of going into a higher education or traditional education degree is really in the traditional signals of validation that we have. Because we believe that we need that validation to be able to build a life. And we believe that companies won't hire us because, you know, without that degree. And so I think that's the phenomenon at play over here, is that we need to do a lot of rebuilding to be able to address both the signaling, but also the underlying economics of what's happening in the sector right now. And just sort of to conclude a little bit more about this, and, you know, I'll pass on to you to get any comments. I mean, if you think about, you graduated when, like 5 years ago? 2015. So same, right? And we've seen over the last 5 years how much change have we witnessed. Like we've seen our business disrupt the traditional sector completely. and new classes of skill emerge, new types of operating models happen. But if you went back into the classroom today, how different would your course curriculum be? So that's where the core issue is that we're living in an era of fluid dynamics where things are changing rapidly, really quickly, and perhaps at a pace that we haven't witnessed before. Whereas traditional education isn't holding itself accountable to participate in that in Industry 4.0. And that's what we have to change. We have to create incentives for them to do that. At the end of the day, if you think about why we've changed, is because we had the incentives to. And we've changed because we knew that if we don't change, we're going to die. And those are the rules of the game. That's capitalism. You want to do things that put you at risk, and good decisions lead to these non-linear outcomes. Whereas bad decisions kill you, and you get punched in the throat. So, and I think that's what's not happening in higher education. If we had more of that happen, you'd see a different world. And COVID, to talk a little bit more about, you said, what's the impact of COVID? So COVID is a massive accelerant. We know that it's across sectors, probably accelerated sectors, and its ability to sort of participate in this new world, in the new world of work, by at least 5 years. And it would be in different contexts depending on which environment you're functioning in. But if you really think about education, right now there's a lot of blended learning happening in higher education, and to be honest, on the demand side, we haven't witnessed too much of a shock. We've really more witnessed a shock on the supply side. So we still have people wanting to go get an international education, and that's also for a few reasons, because international education really is more of an equalizer because of the experience that it delivers and creates. It basically builds these global citizens as a product, which I think is where the value is more than the content. But if you think about the challenges that we're confronting, is purely supply side. So borders are shut, there's restrictions on quarantine, regulatory risk. So that's what we've been confronting. Whereas in terms of how much of a pivot is higher education making, I mean, beyond sort of the blended learning coming in, not much. And I think that's what we're going to have to see change over the next few years. And I have no doubt that COVID will have an impact on it, because people are going to want to ask those questions more and more of how education's creating equal opportunity, addressing the inequity, and allowing people to accelerate into the future with the goals that they have in mind.
I really like that quote, that international education is an equalizer. I couldn't agree more. It teaches you about a different culture, lets you, live an autonomous life, experience the
100%.
campus. So absolutely there.
I mean, it's why we do what we do. We believe that, and I'm a product of this. I grew up in India and Australia and England, and having lived and had the opportunity to live and be in 3 different countries has basically made me the man that I am. And I think higher education internationally is there's nothing. I think the only thing bigger than global ed is really going to space, because it kind of really changes your perspective of your relationship with the universe altogether. So I think global ed is a massive equalizer in the sense that it allows you to really rebuild, meet new people from all sorts of backgrounds, merge your ideas. And just leave your baggage and like the whole context of where you come from behind, and really help rebuild yourself to be an independent global citizen, and think bigger, think more global, and participate in global problems that we're confronting as humanity.
I like the word that you used, that it's signaling. It's a signaling to our parents that we're good enough. It's a signaling to our potential future employers that we're very much hireable. So
it's as Gary Vee says, it's keeping up with Mr. and Mrs. Joneses. It's like, you want to show my kid went to this school and that school, and that's the competition of life, right? Like we're all just signaling, and I think social media has just made that worse. But yeah, like I think that's what has to be dealt with. In fact, the one thing we need to do to address ed is we have to value the vocational worker and celebrate the vocational worker as we celebrate the graduate from Harvard. I think that's what will truly create a paradigm shift, where you're not valuing people for the signals that you create in society, but for actual skills and the actual work and output that they bring to the table.
So you couldn't build up a better transition for me to ask you this. Riddle me this, please. So on one hand, we've got the ever-present desire to impress others, either personally or professionally. On the other hand, we are kind of getting a hint of how we're being played, because the price keeps rising, the product doesn't keep changing. So essentially, like you're saying, the disruption is upon us very soon, but not yet. And in the meantime, we've seen, for example, I don't know, EY or PricewaterhouseCoopers say we don't need a university degree anymore, just impress us with your other achievements at that time, perhaps entrepreneurial activities that are relatable to consulting. We've
Right.
seen people just recently open up their own course that is something into the topic of micro specialization
Yeah.
and reskilling and upskilling and reskilling for our listeners is, for example, changing someone's job, and upskilling is, for example, when you take a minor and the miner starts developing some expertise in terms of mining the moon instead of mining the global Earth. So what is your take on micro specializations? It's somewhere at scale in the future. Won't we see a place where we will just have the consumer saying, I don't really need to give you $59,000 per term per semester.
Right.
I will actually get a course, or I will go to a place like Lambda University, which actually is for free until I'm able to pay it back from my salary.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, man. Again, like there's a lot to unpack here. I think just sort of continuing to talk on that same tangent about how the information age is rebuilding. Well, it's rebuilt our economy, it's rebuilt behavior, but and now it has to rebuild education and the entire operating stack of it. I think what people aren't fully realizing is that it's going to be hard to build this sort of one size solution for all. And that's because we're dealing with a lot of context and different backgrounds of people. And so I do think that traditional education has a place, but it's definitely not as big a place as it has right now. And so if you think of it from a lens of infinite leverage, so one of the things that we're in is that, we're in the age of infinite leverage. Right now, you and I having a conversation. The two of us could be doing this one-on-one, but we're broadcasting to possibly hundreds and thousands of people. And so that brings infinite leverage. You can basically multiply your actions by 1,000-fold. And so the impact of that is that ultimately information is a commodity, right? And so no longer are we building skills or building a citizenry which is built on obedience and on content, learning of content, right? I mean, there was a time in which that made sense. And it really goes back to the industrial age, because higher education as it is has been built for the industrial age. It made sense to build these obedient citizens that would turn into factory workers that basically would remain smart enough to operate the machinery, but stupid enough to not really figure out what's going on in the broader world. And that's been challenged completely with the internet. And so in fact, George Carlin kind of made that statement about how and George Carlin was a famous comedian in the late 90s and early 2000s, and Carlin used to talk about how we don't really have freedom, we just have an illusion of choice. And the things that, and if you think about the modern struggle, it really gets captured with that, because the modern struggle is represented by you and I going to Netflix and taking 30 minutes to decide what we're going to watch. It's a struggle of abundance, and we have to sort of learn to resist that abundance. So the problems have evolved and accelerated and kind of just compounded year on year in these specific tangents. And what's happening is that we're, as a society, not realizing that we have to completely change the education model. We talk about this model of education from a perspective of employment, but if you really think about it, the internet and the information age is completely reversing the industrial age. So, for instance, there's this economic theory by an economist. I forget his name now, but basically he talks about the cost of doing things internally, the internal transactions versus external transactions. What we've seen happen over the last 10, 15, 20 years is that the cost of operating internally has gotten more and more expensive, and the cost of doing those things externally has gotten cheaper. So, for instance, if there's something that we can, give to a third-party contractor, right, we will do that as a company. And that's why and this really is a phenomenon at play in the Valley more than anywhere else, but we've seen that play out globally. So, for instance, if you take, and that's what software does, right? If you take Craigslist, right, the rent marketplace in Craigslist becomes an Airbnb, right? So you basically sort of chip off these small opportunities and you build these massive marketplaces. And what's happening as a result of that is that you're basically right now having a lot of gig work come in and contract work in low skill places, you're going to end up building this gig work and contract work in a very high skilled economy. And that's what we have to prepare people for, is that how do we resist the abundance of information? How do we, create these clear-cut citizens who can think clearly, critically, creatively? How do we get people to participate in the creator economy, in things that require emotional intelligence and creativity, and sort of expand that dimension? Because anything that can be commoditized will be as a result of technology growth. And we're just getting started. But anything that's going to require creativity and emotional intelligence will have a much longer life of sustainability before it does get commoditized. And that's where education is really failing, is that we have to realize that we're in this era of fluid dynamics, of information abundance, of infinite leverage, and build a model of education for that. And what we're going to see happen is like a massive unbundling in education. So Lambda School is crushing the incentive structure completely. It's unbundling education. What it's doing is it's creating a service layer of saying, oh, you know what? Let's basically teach people how to write code, to read and analyze data, and give them these skills so they can participate in this revolution that's occurring in great companies. And when they get a job, that's when we'll be incentivized to pay and actually earn. And so I think that's a great concept, and we're going to see that happen. I think there's a question on what are your views on Lambda School. I think that's exactly what's going to end up happening, across the board in different segments and specializations and disciplines. And that's the other thing, right? Like, if you think about traditional HE, it's like we're going to sort of put people in these boxes, right? But the most amazing stuff and magic happens when you combine two disciplines. So engineering and tech, like engineering and business, go really well together, right? I mean, you can do that with anything really, but specializing in two spaces or building general knowledge in two broad areas is going to give you far more strength than sort of specializing. And there's a great quote on specialization, which I think captures the spirit as well. It's called, it goes like specialization is for ants or for insects. And humans are basically multivariate. Like, we're capable of every experience, so we should just do it all. We have one life, we should just do it all. So I think these are just basic principles that we need to apply in higher ed and in EdTech, through EdTech, to be able to really disrupt the traditional sector altogether.
Okay. And just to wrap up the topic of COVID, because I'm guessing everybody wants to hear and then is sick of the topic of COVID, the impact on your end users, so the clients, the students, or any word that you've gotten from the partners. I know that you've been already sort of unwittingly planning for such an event like COVID with your ongoing digital transformation started prior. But how has that digital transformation helped you? And for example, without this digital transformation, what would have been impossible right now for you to do with your clients, with your students?
Well, I'll tell you, right? So what really excites me is that, so pre-COVID, you know this, we were already going into a platform-first environment. But the one thing that we weren't thinking so much about is remote first. And that's actually allowed us to rebuild our operating stack completely. So COVID's allowed us to accelerate in our vision and journey overall by at least 2 years. And the reason I say that is because it's completely disrupted the whole idea of office centricity for us. I mean, we're been a business analog, we're going to employ people based on a certain location. We're going to bring students into that location. We're going to bring partners into that location. And then they're basically going to have lots of interaction in that location. The end of office centricity has allowed us to create a far more flexible, a far more free, a far more simplified business model and operating model where people basically get to operate from wherever they are. And, by connecting and communicating with people all around the country and in time all around the world, we're unlocking this asynchronous paradigm. And so the value of doing that is that no longer do you have to make decisions on talent based on office centricity. You basically hire the best people, and your ability to attract much higher caliber talent increases significantly. Your ability to serve consumers on a global scale increases significantly. And so all those things have basically allowed us to accelerate our vision and operating model significantly. As far as universities are concerned, as I said, the main impact is on the supply side. We've seen consistent, resilient demand. Students still want to invest in international education. It's not like they're saying it's COVID, so we're going to study in India now. And I think that's happening globally. You have roughly 6 million students that move from home countries to host countries every year for education. And so that market basically is very resilient because they see the value in international education. Unlike domestic education, where you're basically going in for the content, there's a full experience that you're experiencing when you're international, and there's far more deeper and richer experience. So I think that's where the sector is right now. Many universities have tried to adopt and been forced to adopt this model of blended learning. So many of them are starting online, but then you don't want to pay 30 grand, 40 grand, or 20 grand for an online education. You want that campus experience. So they're in that sort of struggle right now of trying to go back into the classroom. And that's why we've seen the US struggle as much. Some countries are better positioned. So, the UK is continuing with an intake over this fall, even though it's going to be a smaller one than, what it would have been otherwise. Europe is starting to reopen and resume classes. Australia and New Zealand remain shut, but I think, by early next year, we're going to see some sort of on-campus recruitment happen. So, I think it's a supply side shock. So ultimately, on the demand side, people want to continue investing in international education, and universities just trying to figure out what's the best operating model. How do we build a framework of compliance, of hygiene, of keeping communities safe, and being able to bring people into university and students in university. The bigger questions around how higher education gets disrupted, I know that at this point in time, it's at least, sort of at the forefront, which it hasn't been because there's been no reason to even think about it. So I am excited about some of the changes that are going to happen as a result of COVID in accelerating higher education in the age of the internet.
And I couldn't agree more that the domestic experience of education, of course, the degree gives you the knowledge, but the international education experience, the universities understand it themselves because they often put you on a placement here that's in another country. I had the opportunity to study in Canada when I was studying in the UK,
right,
granted by my university. So I think this is a topic that everybody's on the same page on. So we could be moving into the topic of current EdTech trends and future of EdTech predictions. We should also let our audience know that EdTech can be divided slightly by age groups because, like Shan mentioned, there's no one solution fits all due to the differentiation geographically. And then, of course, the differentiation between how do you help kindergarten level or elementary level children to have the same knowledge experience at home if they have to or if they want to, but rapidly differentiates when you actually want to possess some skills that will allow you to get a job. Those are two wildly different worlds. So I would love to hear your general overview on the current trends and the predictions, but I also see that we have a question about that. So once you're done, I'll pop it up on the screen.
Yeah, I think with EdTech, firstly, what we need to build is a paradigm in which we nurture experimentation and curiosity. That's what's missing in the traditional sector. So, the problem with EdTech is that if you're basically going to take content and just distribute it, if that's the model, then it's not fixing the problem at a deep level enough. It fixes one part of the problem, but the best education platform is YouTube. Like anybody learning anything today, even at university, where do you go to learn anything? It's YouTube, right? So I think what's happening in our day and age, is that we're getting access to all of this data. So, for us, we get too much information too quickly at all times. So again, coming back to the modern struggle of abundance, is that because we get too much information too quickly, and our brains aren't really wired for this, like this level of information coming to us bombarded constantly 24/7, anybody trying to keep up with it is going to ruin the way they think. And so ultimately, we need to figure out how do we operate in that paradigm, in that environment. And one big part of it is trying to really recognize that while in one way we're losing our attention span and reducing it, we're also getting better and better at multitasking. So if Philip, I gave you like 3 things that you got to master next week, you'll find 1,000 resources to be able to do that. And that's one of the great advantages of being in 2020. So with EdTech, I think from the very early stages, I don't think EdTech solves the problem because you need a lot of experiential learning. Kids ultimately need to be put into an environment of curiosity, of experimentation. The more experiments you run and the more curiosity you're able to nurture, the better thinkers you're going to make them. As they grow up, although, and as they grow older, with all these tools that we have now of being able to self-learn, I think we create a paradigm of self-learning backed by some sort of community-driven model. So community-driven peer-to-peer learning and community-driven validation, I think, becomes a really powerful concept. So any EdTech concepts out there that are building content distribution and backing with community, I think going to have a far greater chance of surviving and continuing to kind of build these experiments going into the future. Fundamentally, I think higher education is one of those things that does need to be disrupted internally. So even though external providers can emerge and create that unbundled service, I do think that we're going to need a paradigm shift from within the higher education sector. And that's one of the things that we're really excited about is that right now we're unlocking core product value and consumer behavior on some parts that are adjacent to this challenge. But in time, as we establish that ecosystem, we can start to unlock these adjacent verticals that can start to deliver, distribute, and connect people with communities to be able to really have a powerful and impactful experience on the learning side. But we know that there's been some really valuable businesses that have come up. In every nation, like in India, you've got a bunch of businesses that are doing really well. You're also seeing models come up where they're really trying to specialize across certain categories. And so there's obviously a lot of traffic, but ultimately, is it a replacement right now for traditional education? It doesn't do that yet. So we have to figure out ways in which we can make EdTech also far more accountable in delivering those skills that actually end up leading to better value in the long term.
So you mentioned the key sort of keyword here, experiential, and I wanted to pop over a question from Tomasz. The question concerns your take on VR and AR. I'll allow myself in, despite the question being asked to you. What I'm seeing immediately is VR and AR, obviously fantastic, but how do we get market share? How do we ensure that every student, every classroom can actually work on devices, if not for VR, then at least for AR? But then again, on the other hand, when I was asking this question, what popped into my mind is we've got Facebook. We've got Facebook acquiring Oculus, going into Facebook Spaces, so giving you this sort of idea of the human-to-human interaction, despite you just having a headset on. Do you think that AR and VR could be the next big thing if simply the financial and technological barriers are overcome?
Well, AR and VR have been like the next big thing for a while, right? Like it's been talked about, but it's not been yet. So
but it's expensive. Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, like the thing is, man, it's always interesting to see what the use cases of adoption are. So I think with AR and VR, it's been one of those technologies that everybody thinks is going to change the whole paradigm, but we haven't seen that happen yet. And you got to find use cases, within education that we believe really build tremendous value and actually unlock some problem solving for those use cases through VR and AR. I personally haven't thought too much about it, so I don't want to bullshit anybody. But I think as an experience, the most powerful thing about AR and VR is that it transports you to that experience altogether. So there's certainly bound to be use cases, but I personally haven't thought too much about how we can leverage this over the next 3 to 5 years to be able to really shift the paradigm. I do know that if we combine that again with some sort of community-centric solutions where you did a bit of learning, it's like you're a knowledge athlete. That's what you are today. So you do a bit of learning, you do your sprints, and then you kind of rest and reassess. And in that reassessment, you're getting together with your peers around the world. So I'm in Delhi, Philip's in Poland. We have someone in New York, another person in LA, and we're all connecting through VR. That could be really powerful. But with Slack and Zoom, I don't know how much better it makes that experience. So that's what I would say about that. And VR and AR are also really powerful from the standpoint of running simulations, right? So one of the great questions of like all time is like, is like if we're building video games and video game technology or VR and AR technology to the infinite point in which it's indistinguishable from reality, if that's where we're going, like what does that all mean for us, right? And so I think that's philosophically, it blows my mind and something that I think about quite a lot. But how much better it makes the experience is something that we still need to see. But definitely to run simulations, whether you're becoming a pilot or becoming a surgeon, things of that nature, it obviously is going to be a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to say that in terms of VR and AR, I wholeheartedly agree with what you just said. And then I can recommend, on the note of the philosophical aspect of VR, The Lawnmower Man, a great movie concerning specifically that, how when it becomes too real. I'll send it later. But coming back to our questions, we have Albert asking in terms of the micro specializations, basically. So somehow connected, because in terms of VR and AR, to wrap up, it's, even if I don't see this happening in higher education institutions, what I see is with VR or HoloLens or mixed reality, I will be able to micro specialize so much better without actually needing a university. If I can be seeing with my own eyes how I'm supposed to assemble this piece at the factory, right? So Albert asks exactly about micro specializations and certificates issued by private companies like Google or anybody else. What's your take?
Yeah, so one of the great predictions on education is that as we move into the future, big tech is going to erode more of our psychology and learning by delivering more and more learning delivering more learning to more people than ever on Earth than ever before, but at the same time also eroding our psychology. So I think that you are probably right about that. You are probably going to see. And Google is, if Google is predicting that, they're probably right about that. You're going to see more online certificates issued by private companies that will be equally valued as traditional higher education diplomas. The question is how soon we get there. So this phenomena is already happening. It's been at play for a couple of years now. But what's the timeline before you see society, companies, and capitalism as a whole start to value these alternative solutions versus the traditional education pedigree? And in fact, doing that transition is going to be very powerful, because in many ways, what we have today is a world in which you have two types of people. You have those that are with resources and those without resources. And higher education is increasingly serving those with resources. So that's the big problem with.
I think you're muted. Yeah.
Yeah. So it almost unlocks this and exacerbates this class war, and we've seen this during even COVID, where it is forcing you into acquiring massive amounts of debt, going into school with the hope that you're gonna get a great job, and then finding that you're in an industrial age that higher education isn't really preparing you for, and so that debt isn't really meaningful in the sense of you getting maximum returns moving into the future, and actually ends up crippling and enslaving you forever. And so you compare that to what's happening in capitalism as a whole, where in the era of cheap money and and low interest rates, you're seeing those with resources be able to borrow more and more leverage, put that into assets in which they are able to inflate compensation altogether and inflate value for themselves. And tomorrow something goes wrong, they basically go to the government and get bailed out, whereas the guy with the student debt doesn't get to do that. And so I think it's going to be a very powerful transition. Even though it's almost like we're right now in the traditional sector, so it's almost like contradicting our business as a whole. But I want that disruption to happen, and we want to participate in that. I think it's powerful. It's going to create a much better democracy, a equal opportunity. Not equal outcomes. You shouldn't confuse equal opportunity and equal outcomes, because outcomes are non-linear. You could be working 8 hours and everybody else could be working 8 hours, but not everybody's going to get the same results. It's about how you're doing it, what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and so on and so forth. But certainly from a standpoint of creating a more equal paradigm, a level playing field, I think it's a far more powerful paradigm than we are in right now.
And just to quote what you said a second ago, that you counter intuitively to your interests right now, you want to see the space disrupted. So to wrap these 40 minutes up with a beautiful question from my close friend Maciej. TC Global, in 10 years, disruption happens. You no longer exist as you exist today, because all of the things that we discussed are either materializing or have materialized. What's in store for TC Global in 2030?
Beautiful. All right. So So for us, our vision. So we have a mission and a vision. And in our mission, we want to be a catalyst of world citizenship at scale. That's what we want to basically do, and that means that we believe in a borderless world. We believe in a world in which the more global citizens we have, the more equalized we make the world, and that's our equalizer in the context of what we're operating right now. Our vision is to be the most valuable mobility and learning ecosystem by 2025. If I extend that to 2030 and I talk about the next 10 years, what we're doing right now basically is to build a platform ecosystem that is backed by community for students, in which users are basically able to use our platform as a search browser to select any course in the world and any university in the world in a traditional sector. We want to expand that into the non-traditional sector too, and the EdTech sector, as well as the alternative category of education. So we would basically expand that proposition across the board in education. What we're also doing for those users is we're unlocking a community. So we're building this global community in which we're taking people from academia, from industry, from former students, and we're able to get them to participate with upcoming students, with a stream of students in which they can talk to them about their decisions, what school, which course, why they should choose that, which industry, what career, and so on and so forth. And that's the other thing about education, is that if we can actually create incentives for people that are in industry to participate in delivery, you'll see the whole shift happen. And it'll be a much higher quality of delivery that you'll see happen, a much more accountable and experiential experience. So that's on the student side. The other thing that we want to do is sort of create these adjacent verticals in which we can build ed technology in which people can actually consume content. So we get a lot of data with regards to people's preferences, skills, what they want to learn, why they want to learn it, what backgrounds they come from. And we want to build a stream of content available through our creator ecosystem, which is universities. So on the other side, what we're doing for universities, quite simply, we've been a traditional brick and mortar recruitment engine for them. What we're doing now is like building a Substack combined with LinkedIn, combined with Google Analytics. So any university in the world can basically sign up, create a page for themselves. They can start to market themselves, and they can get all these analytics that unlock an amazing amount of value for them to be able to reach brand, get a sense of what sort of consumers are talking to them, who the applicants are, and just get to know the consumer base much better so they can adapt to this age. The third thing we're doing is to really unlock that creative engine. So in that community building that we're talking about, we want to basically get a bunch of people to participate in a talent economy. So there's gig and talent. On the gig side, you have gig workers that have flexibility, but commoditized talent. We want gig workers, but highly skilled talent. So imagine if we could create incentives for everybody in Netguru to come onto our platform for a couple hours a week in talking to students. So that's the other thing that we want to do. And we want to basically unlock these network effects to be able to solve problems on all sides. And we believe there's tremendous opportunities in the global mobility and learning space to be able to do that from the tangent and context that we come from. Hope that gives you a bit of a view. But I mean, if you want to talk more, I'd be happy to have a separate call.
Absolutely. I mean, hopefully no competitors were listening. I've heard platform, I've heard community, content. Is that something that you would see yourself stepping into?
Yeah, so I mean, that's what we're doing is from a creator standpoint, our creators, one of the most powerful phenomena that's happened in the social media age is the creator economy. You have a passion economy that's come up. You could be creating content on pretty much anything and building value out of it. So, from our standpoint, the creator economy is the university, where the universities actually get to participate as creators with us. So we want to unlock a really interesting creative engine for them where they can start to create content and deliver all that content in short bits and short form video to students.
Okay.
That's certainly something that we're thinking about, but ultimately, look, man, it's early days. We're really excited about this transition from analog to platform. What we're doing is a bit like if you imagine one of the biggest taxi companies in the world building Uber. There's a reason why that hasn't happened. It's very difficult to disrupt your own business. Or like one of the biggest travel companies in the world building Airbnb. These are the parallels equal to, or one of the biggest recruiters in the world building LinkedIn. So it's very difficult to disrupt your own businesses. And you have a world of disrupted and the people that are disrupting. So we've gone from one that is going to be disrupted to increasingly transitioning into something that's disrupting. And we just want to continue building great products, solving problems for our consumers, and iterating the product to be able to build something that of enormous value for our consumer base.
So now to top it off with icing on the cake, the cherry on top, here's a question that puts you a little bit on the spot. Jacob asks, Jacob has an 18-year-old brother. What is an 18-year-old brother to do in 2020? So many things are changing, and you're supposed to make a life slightly financially threatening decision of potentially going into debt without knowing if these things will be relevant even in 5
Is
years.
that in the sense of what he should do? So this is a broad question. I need a little bit more information. What he should do, whether he should participate in the traditional sector, or he should, what he should be doing?
The question reads, 18-year-old brother who has limited idea on what to do with his next steps in terms of education.
Yeah, I mean, so look, I need more information, but broadly speaking, what I would really do, I mean, one of the great advantages of being alive right now is that we get to do what we love. We really can. So if there's anything he's really interested in that really drives him, I would really accelerate him in that direction, and I would try and surround him with people that get him to stimulate that. So from the perspective of what courses and careers to go into, that's one of the key directions I would take. And I would use the infrastructure around us. We have this massive infrastructure for all the problems big tech has. Having the ability to broadcast on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter is phenomenally powerful. So, I would start to really participate in the creator economy and build an audience, learn, deliver content and so on and so forth. And obviously start to build something of that nature. But as far as education is concerned, I need more details on, what his interests are and what he's thinking about right now, what schools he's thinking of, what courses he's thinking of. So, if Jacob is at Netguru, I'm happy to have a conversation outside of this live session.
So basically, the overarching advice is aim to produce at least as much as you consume, because then you will be on the creator side. And
you don't consume. You want to limit your consumption, and you want to create more content. Because we're kind of like, it's the endless feed, right? One feed to the next. We're just scrolling. There's endless variability, and it's eating your mind. It's eating, your ability to think, to critically, and analyze information, to do anything that's meaningful. And a lot of us are consuming a lot of junk. So you want to limit that. You want to curate your feed and control that and create more than you consume, 100%.
So Jacob, I'm sure that if you go on TC Global's page and you go into the contact section, further answers to this question.
You can create an account. I would love, Jacob, if your brother, he can create an account. We do right now. Our product is slightly contextual to India, but he still can create an account, and we can have a conversation separately outside of this live session.
So Jacob, hope you heard that. Make sure to capitalize on this one-time offer. So yeah, basically, Shan, thank you so much. I hope we will be able, despite all things COVID, to see each other in London in December, as we're planning to. So thank you once again for this. And one last thing that I wanted to mention is in the comments, in a matter of seconds, you will see Netguru's report on EdTech. So I'm inviting everybody in the audience to have a read through it. You can come back to the comments, or you can come back with questions. So in the comments, you can find the report, the link to the report, our own Netguru EdTech report. And in the meantime, Shan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, man. We appreciate it. We're being here. And hopefully everybody enjoyed it. Thanks for hosting.
I'm sure they did. Thanks a lot, and see you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
See you, bro. Bye-bye.